college. And Flannel, I'd like to start with you on this. To me, Ja'Marr Chase, not too long ago, was compared to Calvin, and I thought that was fair in terms of generational type skill set coming out. Now Marvin Harrison Jr. is getting that same attention, that same love. I think rightfully so. And to be honest with you, I don't hate the comparison. Not that they're Megatron, not that they're going to be that 6'5", 4'4", 40, down the field, triple coverage. No, they're different players. So comparing them to Calvin maybe isn't ideal. It's not you're not fitting a square peg into a, whatever you want to call it, a round hole. I don't fucking know. I'm not good with any of this stuff. But anyways.
Oh, you are.
The point is.
You walk right into it every single time.
Because I try to remember what the hell they mean. But the point is, this guy is special. And Flannel, I have no doubt he'll go top 5 next year.
Yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr., I think the craziest thing about him when it comes to even comparing him to other Ohio State wide receivers. Ohio State lately has been, no doubt, wide receiver. You got Garrett Wilson, who was last year's NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year. Chris Olave, who came right in and had 1,000 yards. Jackson Smith-Njigba, and a guy like Emeka Egbuka, who's going to be on the team with him this next year. But Marvin Harrison Jr. rises above all of them, at least when it comes to an NFL prospect. To me, he has all of the sort of route running ability, the fluidity, the skill set of as a wide receiver as his dad does, or at least an approximation of it. But unlike Marvin Harrison Sr., Marvin Harrison Jr. is 6'4". He's got better speed. He's the prototype when it comes to size. He's not the freak of nature that Calvin Johnson was, but I think he was even more refined as a prospect. There is no bust factor to Marvin Harrison Jr. He would go into the NFL right now and be one of the most skilled and refined wide receivers there is. And it's funny, Adam, you mentioned Ja'Marr Chase. That was the first name that came to my mind in terms of elite generational wide receiver prospects since Calvin Johnson, because we tend to forget how great Ja'Marr Chase was even at LSU. He had that phenomenal year with Justin Jefferson on the other side. Then he took a year off, but
he still went top 5.
He still went top 5, and that's what happens when you have 84 catches for over 1,700 yards and 20 touchdowns in a season, to combine all of the athletic gifts that he has. And Adam, before you go, I have a couple of other names since Calvin Johnson that were also, I would say, generational, freakish type of talents. Remember that draft that had Julio Jones and A.J. Green?
Yep.
Those were a couple others that were just so hyped up, and at least Julio Jones lived up to it. A.J. Green obviously had a phenomenal career.
Julio Jones was taken 8th overall, right? They traded up for him.
He was, yeah, I think so. He was,
and then A.J. Green went,
I believe, 4.
Yeah, oof.
Julio Jones was 6th.
Wow, Julio Jones was 6th.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, wow. Look, I mean, this is what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
Receivers are going to go top 5, top 6. Marvin Harrison's going to go top 5, and whoever gets him is very lucky.
Oh, yeah.
You're very lucky to have him. He's going to be a boost to your offense right away. It could be the Cardinals. They might have 2 top 5 picks depending on how you feel about the Texans, but Marvin Harrison Jr. as a prospect, I think he's the best receiver coming out. The Biletnikoff Award, right? We always look to the receiver. I've seen so many receivers win that award. Justin Blackmon. The list can go on and on and on that just don't pan out in the NFL. This guy is a wide receiver 1. Whoever takes him top 5, they're going to be very happy. It's a great investment. Wide receivers are now more important than ever. But to compare him to Calvin, I don't think is fair to anybody. Not because Calvin of what he was in the NFL, just coming out. We haven't seen that. 6'5", 4'4", 40, runs every route. It's not normal. Usually they do one or the other, right? They're the speedster, or they're just a really tall, like a Quentin Johnson, a guy that has the length, and you're like, man, that guy could translate in the NFL. They're not supposed to do everything. So Calvin was an anomaly. And then, of course, we have to thank, at the time, the Oakland Raiders for drafting Jamarcus Russell. I mean, we have to give credit where credit's due, because there's no Calvin Johnson in Detroit if the Raiders don't draft the Jabba the Hutt, donut-eating fat man and Jamarcus Russell #1 overall. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen, Flannel.
Calvin Johnson was so good and such a great prospect. Remember at the time, Matt Millen had whiffed on 3 consecutive wide receivers, Charles Rogers, Mike Williams, and Roy Williams. Although Roy Williams did some things, he certainly wasn't worthy of his draft status. And there was still absolutely no doubt that they had to take a chance on the generational prospect from Georgia Tech, because Calvin Johnson, quite simply, is the greatest wide receiver prospect coming out of college ever. And when he was in the NFL, I would say on a per-game basis, at least when it comes to impact, he was one of the best wide receivers I've certainly ever seen. And I think he's still way up there when it comes to receiving yards per game. So putting Calvin Johnson type of expectations on a Marvin Harrison Jr., that is certainly lofty. But Marvin Harrison Jr., just when it comes to NFL-ready, refined wide receivers coming out into the NFL. I know this sounds cliche, but you can tell that a guy like Marvin Harrison Sr. was his dad, because he plays like him in a lot of ways, but he's 4 inches taller.
Can I push back on the Calvin Johnson greatest wide receiver prospect to come out?
Feel free.
Okay. How do I say this? Because I love Calvin. But to me, Randy Moss comes to mind. Calvin's top 5 easily in terms of like greatest wide receiver prospects, but there's a guy that does a show here at 2:00, and I'm pretty sure he's one of the 5-10 greatest college wide receivers ever.
Oh, dude.
That's right. And Braylon was taken what, number 3 overall?
He was 3, yes.
But so
It's
when we
just
talk
funny
about
when you look over
college,
to me and you're
I
saying
know.
that 'cause I know you're sitting in this chair, but
So like college resume, I mean, Calvin had one 1,000-yard season. It was his last year. Obviously, he was a freak of nature. Rightfully so, taken number 2 overall. Thank you very much, Raiders, like I mentioned earlier. But we can't gloss over, Jerry Rice coming out of college was him. I mean, Jamar Chase just a few years ago. We're just going to forget it?
Well, we're having 2 different conversations at this point, because, yeah, Calvin Johnson didn't have this phenomenal...
I'm thinking of college to NFL, not, of course, thinking what they were in the NFL. Don't get me wrong.
No, 100%. I think with Calvin Johnson, it was more about his physical traits, too. We obviously saw him be dominant at Georgia Tech, but it's not like he was racking 1,000-yard seasons. He had 1, and he obviously looked phenomenal while doing it. I mean, you mentioned Braylon Edwards. He had 3 1,000-yard seasons at Michigan, and he was also a physical specimen, and he was rewarded by being taken number 3 overall. Randy Moss... he should have been drafted much higher than he was.
But it was just off-field.
It was just off-field, but I think when we're having this conversation, we have to nitpick and penalize a little bit the fact that he was drafted in the teens. He shouldn't have been. There is no reason in hell he should have been drafted as low as he was. He had some off-field problems, but still. Calvin Johnson was the number 2 overall pick as a wide receiver, and he lived up to the hype. That's hard to do.
I'm trying to think of not what their NFL careers panned out to be, just going into the draft, how highly were they rated, right? And yeah, Calvin was arguably the best prospect in that draft coming out. And you could argue Jamar Chase was that coming out. You could argue that Randy Moss, you could argue Jerry Rice, you could argue a lot of these guys coming out that were just that damn good. Braylon Edwards was drafted number 3 overall. I mean, it's not like the talk was, oh, he could be a good wide receiver. No, this is the best fucking receiver we've seen in 10 years come out of college. He dominated the Big Ten. Yeah, I think we're taking him in the top 5, so it's just my thoughts.